women.
Yeah. Okay.
It's only women.
So, I had no idea what the other shiurim were about, so I was hoping not to overlap on anybody. So I decided to do something that's a little bit different and a little obscure, but I think it's very relevant. I wanted to focus a little bit more on Taanit, Esther, than on Purim, since we get so in the spirit of Purim that we forget that there's like a Taanit, and what is the Taanit all about? And I just want to read for you what the Mishnah Berurah says about Taanit Esther. There's two different reasons. Yeah, it's not videoing me. It's just audioing me. Okay. There's two different reasons given why we fast on Taanit Esther. Either to remember the fast of Esther. Now, Esther fasted for 3 days in Nisan. So why don't we fast on 3 days in Nisan? Because first of all, you can't fast during Nisan. And second of all, we want to make it close to Purim because that's when it happened. That's what will remind us of Esther. She fasted 3 days before going, Esther and the people, before going into Achashverosh. That's one reason we fast, to remember the Taanit of Esther. The second reason given why we fast really has nothing to do with the fact that Esther fasted, but rather it was the day before they went into battle. Remember in the Megillah, on the 13th day, the Jews were given the right to defend themselves, and therefore on the 14th day they were given the right to defend themselves, and therefore on the 13th of Adar, the day before, they fasted because they're going into battle. And when you're going into battle, you realize you might die. And so it's the day before you're going into a very important event. So what do you want to do? You want to fast. Why fast? If you're going into battle, you need all the energy. The fasting wasn't so much for the fasting, but more for the obviously the tefillah and bakasha that you go into battle when you realize that tomorrow might actually be my last day on earth.
I heard that Sahal, even now they do that.
Oh really? They fast before they go?
I mean, I don't know about Sahal exactly, but I heard that.
People, soldiers themselves. So what is fasting really? And Taanit Esther, of all the minor fasts, it's the minorest of the minor fasts. It's the one that, like, again, if you really don't feel good, you don't have to fast. It's the first one.
If your nose hurts, you don't have to
fast. If your eyes hurt, you don't have to fast. It's really a minor fast. So it's so much more about what goes on the day than actual fasting. What is the day all about?
I felt like it was so much bigger.
No, opposite. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, בוודאי גם בימי מרדכי היו מתענים באותו יום, ולכן נהגו כל ישראל להתענות בי"ג אדר, ונקרא תענית אסתר, כדי לזכור שהשם יתברך רואה ושומע כל איש בעת צרתו. The point of fasting is not to remember the historical fact that either Esther fasted or they fasted the day before battle, but says the Mishnah Berurah for us to remember that Hashem sees and listens to each person in their tzara, and it is every other fast day. But there seems to be something even more connected to this fast day. The other fast days we're mourning the loss of the Beit HaMikdash. The end of that story wasn't good. So we fast on Asar B'Tevet and Tisha B'Av. The end wasn't good. Bnei Yisrael, the Beit HaMikdash, were destroyed. Here the end is good. The end is we fast on Taanit Esther. Esther fasted, or they fasted before they went into battle, and they had a great Yeshua. So as opposed to the fast as commemorating the Chorban Bayit, this fast actually means they fasted, they did tshuva, they prayed, and Hashem answered their prayers. Because they actually did tshuva and they prayed. So I think one element of Taanit Esther, and probably more than any other Ta'aniyot, all the other minor fasts are Zecher l'Chorban. This is Zecher l'Yeshua. They fasted and they got the Yeshua. And what made them get the Yeshua? Says the Mishnah Berurah, K'dei lizkor she'Hashem yitbarach ro'eh v'shomea ish be'et tzarato. What do we remember on Taanit Esther? We remember that Hashem actually listens to our prayers and that Yeshua can actually happen. We're not mourning, but what is Taanit Esther all about? It's about prayer. And if you think about the whole day of Taanit Esther is not a sad day, but it's a day full of prayer. It's a more serious day. And what you have in front of you is Mizmor Chaf Bet. Mizmor Chaf Bet of Tehillim is Lamnatseach al Ayelet HaShachar. The minhag is to say this parak of Tehillim on Taanit Esther. Yeah.
I think it's just very interesting that everyone keeps on comparing like Yom Kippur to Purim, and Purim is like a day of prayer, and like
It connects for sure.
That's a serious day.
Right, it's a serious day, and exactly that's what we said. Remember when Chamesh Megillot, when we were doing, we said Erev Yom Kippur is the opposite of Erev Purim, also.
Right.
So this Mizmor, if you open up your Siddurim, you're like, okay, it's Taanit Esther, it's this day that's supposed to be about Tefillah and Shuvah. What should I say? So what's nahug in many communities and in many shows to say Mizmor Chafbet. So I figured since it's a day of Tefillah, let's read a little bit about Mizmor Chafbet, and I think it's a beautiful, beautiful Mizmor that is attributed to Esther writing it. Lamnatseach al Ayelat HaShachar. The words are not easy, so I gave you the English Hebrew here.
Esther wrote it.
Yeah. Either Esther wrote it, Chazal attributed it, or Esther said it. Meaning, maybe David HaMelech wrote it, but Esther said it. When did she say it? As she was going in to the king, as she was fasting, as she was praying. Now, she had fasted for 3 days, and she was feeling extremely, extremely abandoned by God. This Mizmor, the first half of the Mizmor, is extremely depressing. Lamnatseach al Ayelat HaShachar. Now, what is Ayelat HaShachar? It means the sunrise. So it begins and talks about, this is a Mizmor about sunrise, that moment, the dawn breaking in the morning. Mizmor LeDavid. Eli, Eli, lama azavtani, rachok mi yeshuati dvarai sha'agati. God, why have you abandoned me? Esther feels completely abandoned by God. Rachok mi yeshuati. My Yeshua is so far away. It's not that she fasts and feels good and feels really confident and now ready to face the world. She feels completely disconnected, abandoned by God. Elohai, ekra yomam lo ta'aneh. God, I pray and you're not answering. The threat of Haman is still there. I feel distant from you. Laila velu dumiyali. At night, I pray during the day and you don't answer me. I pray at night and there's no relief. This is the feeling that we've all experienced of unanswered prayers. Pray and pray and pray, and simply unanswered prayers. And then she almost gets angry at God. Ve'ata kadosh yoshev tilot Yisrael. God, you are on high. You can do anything. Becha batchu avotenu, batchu v'tifaltenu. My forefathers had bitachon, and you saved them. Meaning, i.e. in parentheses, and you're not saving me. And all I'm left with is unanswered prayers. They cried and they were saved. And they weren't embarrassed. But what about me? All my forefathers. You should look back in Jewish history, God. They prayed and they were saved. And look at me. It's like that feeling of everyone else gets what they want, and here I'm left with nothing. Anochi tolat velo ish. I'm a worm. I'm not even a person. She feels like nothing. This is the total sense of depression. She's mamash at the end here. Cherpat adam ubezui am, and everyone despises me. Kol ro'ai lagubi li. Everyone's laughing at me. Yefatiru bisafa ya'anu rosh. They reject me. They shake their head, they laugh at me. You think Esther reaches the highest level of society. She's the queen. She feels like completely nothing. And the rest of the first half of the Mizmor is her going on and on. That enemies are surrounding her like animals. She's so afraid. She feels the pain in her bones. It's again in Pasuk Yud Chet. She says, Asperat kol atzmotai, I'm counting all my bones. You know when you have a headache? Suddenly your head is killing you, but like if we don't have a headache, we're not even aware that our head is on our shoulders. Your arm hurts and you just really feel it. You feel bones, you work out and you feel like muscles you never had before. She goes, I'm in so much pain that I feel bones that I never felt before. I can count them. And they're staring at me and I have no hope.
Did that allude to her death? That she was scared she was going to die?
Scared she was going to die, scared that she's going to be the mockery, and most importantly, she feels abandoned and rejected and unanswered by God. Now, what she sees in Pasuk Chav Gimel, the tone of the Mizmor changes. Asapra shimcha la'achai b'toch kahal ahalecha. After she goes on and how she's alone, how she's mocked, how her enemies are surrounding her, she says, what am I going to do? And her tone changes a little bit from feeling, she has this feeling of self-pity. But then she says, I'm going to tell my brothers, Betoch kahal ahalalecha. I'm going to start talking about you, God, and I'm going to praise you when I'm in public. In private, as I'm walking into the king's palace. When I'm alone, I feel like a tolat v'lo ish. I feel like a worm. I feel like a nothing. I feel abandoned. I feel rejected. But I'm going to start talking about you to my brothers. And what's going to happen? Yir'ei Hashem yahalu kol zeri Yaakov bichvodo gur mimenu kol zeri Yisrael. Suddenly, I'm going to turn to my community. When I feel alone, I'm going to go to Yir'ei Hashem. I'm not going to be alone. And that's what she says. What does she say to Mordechai? Go gather, lech knos et kol Yehudim. When I'm all alone, I feel abandoned and rejected by God. But when I turn outwards to my community, suddenly I have a support system here. And I can go to other Yirei Hashem, and they're praising God, and maybe it's going to affect me. And from her turn outwards towards Am Yisrael, the entire tone of the Mizmor changes. Ki lo baza velo shiket anut ani velo histir panav mimeni. Suddenly God doesn't hate me anymore. God has a pasuk chafei. God hasn't turned his face away from me. B'shabati elav shama. When I pray to him, he listens. It's a different Esther. It's a different tone. The beginning is when she's alone and she feels nothing. In the second half of the Mizmor, when she turns outwards, towards the Keilah, towards the Am, towards other Yirei Hashem, suddenly she feels, wow, I feel the Yeshua. I feel like Hashem is actually, now my prayers are heard. Bishuato, I love Shama, he's listening. And then she continues, and at the end, the Mizmor continues again in this much more positive tone. Yavou v'yagidu tzidkato la'am nolad ki asa. Everyone will come and to talk about God's righteousness, the good of God, not the anger of God and the resentment of God and the abandonment of God she feels in the beginning of the Mizmor, but this feeling of Yeshua, that everyone's going to go around and say how just and how wonderful and how praiseworthy is God. Now this reflects not what happened to Esther is that indeed her prayers were answered. Achashverosh let her in. She saved the people. God sent the Yeshua. So you could say the tone of the beginning is before her prayers were answered, and the tone of the end was when her prayers weren't answered. But I think what I pointed out about this change in tone is, where did her bitachon come from? When we feel abandoned, when we feel, how can I pray again? When we feel at the lowest, most depressing, alone point in our lives, what can give us strength? Give us strength is connecting with other Jews, looking at the power of Am Yisrael. And really, that's what Purim is all about. The mitzvot of Purim are social mitzvot. Even reading the Megillah, which is usually a ben adam lech makom, it's just reading the text. What do we say? Berov am hadrat melech. You're supposed to find the Megillah reading that has the most people. And we have a mishteh. We have a party with other people. And we give matanot evyonim. And we give mishloach manot. The whole day of Purim is about this idea of achdut. Why? Because when you feel alone, Esther felt alone. Her strength came from lech knos et kol Yehudim, the idea of gathering all the Jews. When was her lowest point? When she felt her prayers weren't answered. And sometimes it's when you're at that lowest point where you can turn to God with the most sincerity. When you're at the lowest, mima'am makim, from the lowest point where you feel like you are about to give up, that is where you find God. When you haven't yet reached rock bottom, sometimes you can't get up. You're like, it's not so bad, it's not so bad. When you reach rock bottom, it is there you find God. And what was the greatness of Esther is that she reached rock bottom, as reflected in this Mizmor. When she was going into Achashverosh, she literally reached rock bottom, and she pulled herself off by the power of Am Yisrael. So what is Taanit Esther all about? Taanit Esther is that feeling, is a day of prayer. It's not a day of unanswered prayers. It's a day where there is the potential, the spiritual potential to answer all of our prayers. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. We remember on Taanit Esther that Esther's prayers were answered. There's no other fast day like that. That we feel like, wow, this is the day where I can do tshuva and my prayers are answered. And then we go from Taanit Esther, unless you're in Yerushalayim, to the Megillah reading. You go from fasting to a huge party. Because that was exactly what happened to Esther. She went from the depths, from the feeling of anochi tolat velo ish, the feeling of nothingness and abandonment, to the feeling of Yeshua. How? By turning to Am Yisrael. So when we reach that point, and that's the idea of the tefillah of Taanit Esther. The tefillah of Taanit Esther is prayers that can be answered. The spiritual potential of the day is a day of tefillah. It's not a day of sadness. It's a day of tefillah in anticipation of coming together as a community and facing God. So it's the tefillah before we get to Purim. When we get to Purim, then we're at that point of the second half of the Mizmor. We feel the Yeshua. Why do we feel the Yeshua? Because we're together. So if there is something to work on Taanit Esther, first of all, say this Mizmor on Taanit Esther and try to reflect on these Mizmor, those feelings where we have those prayers in our lives that are unanswered. And remember, it's not a sad day, but rather it's a day of incredible tefillah and incredible spiritual potential, so that we can then celebrate the Yeshua on a personal level and on a national level that we reach on Purim. There's more to say about this Mizmor, but I'll leave it up to you guys.
It reflects like her life.